Um, so one of the things that I love to do is I strive to provide impactful information to people new to safety in their workplace, whether they're a new safety committee member or they're a new safety professional in their field, and they're just like, where do I start? Right? Give me the basics. So I wonder if you could tell us what are we talking about in safety right now? What's the word on the street with safety? What are you hearing? What are you seeing that is going to give us some insights?
Yeah. I'm sure I probably got about three, maybe four things I can talk about. 'Cause safety is never always just sort of this one
Right.
thing. But I have met with WCB recently, so they've talked about their high risk strategy. So if you're listening and you're from the province of British Columbia, one of our top five for WorkSafe BC is that they're going to be focusing this year on risk assessments and hazard
Mm,
assessments. And, people have procedures, but they're not really formally doing hazard assessments. So I think one of the tips I could give a new person is really get it, like really understand what a hazard assessment is, understand that, how to fill one out properly and what the goal of a hazard assessment is. A lot of times when I read hazard assessments, they'll say hazard is forklift, and then they rank it. I'm like, well, that's only part of it, right?
right.
That's only part of it. There's nothing wrong with a forklift. It's being struck by the forklift that's an
Right.
issue. And so even now when I spend time with students and supervisors and owners, I'm like, okay, so you've got here chemical exposure, but what does that mean? Does it mean if I breathe it, I'm going to die? Or does it mean when I breathe it, I'm going to have a cough or it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be an irritant? And so we started to describe really what that hazard was. And I said, okay, now that you've said this is going to irritate your skin, but this is going to melt your
Right.
eyeballs, do you feel better as a worker that you know that? And it was like this,
Right.
like, oh, right. Because when, I always say people, when we say, if there's an incident and we say, hey, what happened? Whatever they say next is usually the hazard. So, hey, what happened? They fell. Hey, what happened? They were electrocuted.
Hmm.
Hey, what happened? They were burned. We don't say, hey, what happened? Forklift.
Right.
Hey, what happened? Ladder. Hey, what happened? Paper. Like, we say what happened? They got a cut.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really key thing for new people or even current people
Yeah.
to understand that WCB is going after that. But I think that the conversation in
Hmm.
general, outside of legislation that people are having, really is the mental health, the mental wellness. How do we do that now that this is coming into the workplace so much, and that in different generations, and that baby boomers and the Gen Xers and stuff. I mean, we were really taught sort of how to deal with certain
Right.
situations, circumstances. We had different outlets. We had the families and churches and communities, and we're just not seeing people as active in those kinds of things. And so they're really, when they come to work, it's just, how is it as a supervisor? Yesterday I taught a class on investigations, and the supervisor said, Tanya, I had a worker call me today and said, I can't come in today because I'm not feeling loved and respected at home.
Hmm.
And so I need to take a day off of work.
Wow.
And I was like, and he laughed at me because we were both Gen Xers, and we're like, well, we would have done that, but we would have lied about it. We would have said, oh, we're sick or something. But, the generations coming up is really saying, hey, listen, I'm
Yeah.
hurting and I have anxiety, and how the conversation is, what do I do with that as a
Hmm.
supervisor? Like, how do I teach that anxiety is okay?
Right.
Anxiety is what stretches and grows, and failure is okay, and
Hmm.
and that this is what gives, these rough edges is sort of what propels us forward, but yet still have compassion
Yeah.
and love and guidance. And when we're some of the leaders now, or Gen Xers, our bosses used to say jump, and we would say how high,
Right.
you know and now we're in these leading positions, and we're like, well, you come to work, and now we have to change our
Right.
brains. And I think we're taught, like, I meet with groups of people that want to figure it out. Like, we don't want to be like that. We want to figure out how to educate and embrace and bring up this new generation, because there are extraordinary people. Like, they're
Hmm.
extraordinary. And sometimes we get like, oh, well, Jan, they're just lazy, or they're this or that or whatever. I mean, I think every generation has said that about the next
Yeah.
generation, but they're truly doing extraordinary things.
Yeah.
And we just need to figure out how to help them through it.
Hmm.
So WCB, the high risk strategy, hazard assessment, the mental illness, and how do we need to have those conversations of what that looks like in inclusion and all of that stuff. And then what I'm seeing, it's the third thing I was going to tell you about, is I'm really focusing on people's manuals. I've somehow fallen into this place of really people send me their manuals just to review it. And, there was years where you'd be like, have a manual, and it would be 982 pages, and it would be in a binder on a shelf, right?
Right.
And you'd be like, what? Well, the manual says, and you're like, oh my gosh. And so now I'm trying to tell people, let's not just have a manual for a manual.
Right.
And so that's what I taught at the CSSE.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really good.
When we met again, I guess from back 10 years before that, when we did the temporary placement agency. But so that's what I was speaking on, is how these manuals are 300-400 pages, but they don't actually say anything,
Right.
and they're not helpful to workers. And we wonder why they don't like safety. They don't read the manual because it's unhelpful.
Yeah.
It doesn't, like, your manual, let's say I go to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I know, Simon, that you've seen these, and I know that you work on these manuals and you're extraordinary at it. But you tell the workers finally decides to look at the manual, and the manual doesn't really say anything. And it
Right.
says, see the CSA standard. And they're like, oh, okay, and where do I go to get that? And we send them somewhere else, which you have to pay for to see the $300 standard. And the standard refers to the manufacturer's instructions, or the manual says see manufacturer's instructions. We're like, well, where are they?
Right.
And then the manufacturer's instructions, if the worker finds them, says see company's procedures. And
So we're putting
it just
people in a
doesn't-
big
it just
circle. Yeah.
right? And it's frustrating. And so that's what I'm focusing on this year. So again, for you, if you're listening and you're like, hey, I want to know some stuff, focus on your hazard assessments. Focus on really how do we have these conversations on mental health and meeting people where they're at in inclusion. And the third thing is make your manual useful.
Yeah.
Make it practical. Learn how to write something that people need and want to look at and read.
Mm-hmm. So good.
That was really long-winded. I'm sorry, Simon.
No, I was taking notes. That's super good. And I know I can go back and listen to this anytime, but I was like, oh, that's good. I've got to take note of that. Monday morning is going to look fun because I'm going to have these notes in front of me of what I need to be looking at next. So that's amazing. Thank you, Tanya. Being on a safety committee can be intimidating to somebody, especially if this is like the first time they're on a committee. I mean, it's like the formality of it, and all these things that you've never heard about potentially, and it may be even really formal and scary, because if you're not with the bosses all the time, you're like, oh my goodness, like the boss man is sitting right over there, or
right, I'm scared, I don't want to say anything.
Yeah, like, is it going to get me in trouble, or what is that? And taking all your experience and because you're an expert on safety committees, what one thing would you tell a joint occupational health and safety committee to do to rejuvenate their committee?
Be positive. And let me expand on that. Like before 2015, there was an act, right? The WC Act said, have a committee.
Right.
Good luck.
Okay.
And so people would come and they'd be like, well, what do we talk about? And the manager would be there and they're scared to talk, and they're like all of those things that you say, and they're like, well, this is, somebody, quietly says, well, this is broken. And well, this is broken. Well, this is broken. Well, that sucks. Well, you suck. No, you suck. Great meeting. See you next month. And this is still broken. And this is broken. And that's broken. Well, that sucks. Well, yeah,
Right.
you suck. Yeah, you suck. Great meeting. And they sort of turn into these sort of griping and complaining sessions, and then maybe us versus them kind of thing. And I think that we need to add some positivity and some good outcomes. And when I say that, my question I always ask a joint committee is, how do you know you're successful? And a lot of times people will say, well, we don't have any injuries. And I'm like, okay, is that because you're successful or because you're lucky?
Right.
And right. And so how do you know you're successful? And so I always say how you start the meeting and how you end the meeting is what's going to rejuvenate your committee. So when we talk about the positives at the end of the meeting, when you do the round table, right? You go around the room. All
Hmm.
right. Do you have anything? Do you have anything? Do you
Yeah.
have anything? And everybody's like, no, 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 no. I just want to get out of here and, whatever. I'll say to committees that I sit on, when we come to the round table at the end, you're not allowed to come with no. You
Mm,
have to come with something. Now, here's my rule or guidance. It doesn't have to be something bad.
right.
And so, in go and talk to a fellow coworker. Go ask them some random questions about your manual, like, "Hey, do you know what the three rights are?" And see if they
Hmm.
know. Do if you got the hand sanitizer in your eye, where's the SDS sheet? Like, do they know? Like,
Right.
don't like drill people. That's what I'm talking about. But just grab a few people and ask some questions,
Hmm.
and then at the end of your meeting, after you've kind of done the stuff that we need to improve on and those kind of things, at the end of the meeting, we're like, okay, so Simon, do you have anything? Yeah, Tanya, I went and asked a couple workers if they knew the three rights, and everybody knew the right to refuse unsafe work. That's
Right.
excellent. Now we know something's working.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, do you have anything? Yeah, Tanya, I went and asked a couple people if they got injured, if they knew who the first aid attendant was. Everybody knew who the first aid attendant is. That's awesome. Hey, Sally, do you have anything? Yeah, Tanya, the posters we put up. I was curious if anybody was looking at them, and a few people noticed them and they really appreciate it. That's
Hmm.
awesome. Hey, do you have anything? Yeah, Tanya, that funny social media post that we put on lifting? I was curious if people liked it, and people loved it.
Right.
Why aren't we ending meetings like that instead
So
of
true.
this is broken, this sucks, you suck. Yeah, great
Right.
meeting. See you next time. And so if you want to rejuvenate your committee, what's working?
Hmm.
And I think that we need to report what's working, some positives on there, so the people who do join, because people who join committees, they want to
Right.
make a difference. That's why they do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And unless they see us moving forward and see some changes or some positivity, they're not gonna stay.
Right.
And have those conversations, because WCB requires you to fill an evaluation form now
Hmm.
annually. How do you know you're successful? So
Right.
let's have the conversation on our successes so
Yeah.
that we know it's working. And I think that's spectacular. And then, when I said the beginning and the end makes a difference for rejuvenating,
Hmm.
I always have a reminder at the beginning, like write a mission statement or a vision statement for your
Mm.
committee, not the work one, but your committee, where
Right.
you can every day, not every day, once a month when you meet.
Yeah.
Imagine every day somebody's listening, going, "What? We have to meet every day?"
Wait a minute.
Once a month. Once a month when you meet,
Yeah.
sit down and say, "Hey, our goal is, or our mission is, to have
Hmm.
managers and workers come together to work in
Yeah.
collaboration, right? To discuss our perspectives on things. 'Cause we all have different perspectives and different values. And we
Hmm.
want to put that into the pot and have the conversation and then come up with the best solution that really
Right.
helps the majority of the people. And
Hmm.
I say that at the beginning of the meetings to remind people it's not us versus them. This is not a complaint session. It
Right.
really is us being a collaborative thing. And I think we've taken creativity out of meetings because we're so, all right, step number one, step number two, step number three. Okay, now we go through the incident investigations. Okay, now we talk about the stats. Okay, now we do the
Right.
inspections. Like, let's stop and
Hmm.
have 10 minutes where we can let's talk about something creative. Like, what can we do that's really different and wild
Right.
and something we can find out if it's working or not working?
Yeah. I love
Anyway,
that. I love
yeah,
that.
so that's my thing.
Do you think that people try to formalize it so much because they know that it's a record that they have to keep for a certain amount of time? Or is it that they just don't know how to tie in fun elements with the elements that they're required to do?
Yeah, probably. Simon's great question. Probably both. I think those are both great comments because we are
Hmm.
very document driven, um, but at the same time, y- as a society, when we talk about meetings, I think everybody's sick of meetings. Like I did a big research on it, and somebody had done it, I think, in the States where they had. Surveyed like 1,000 supervisors and owners and workers, not in construction, like just in general,
Okay.
from all different
Right.
industries. And they said, how many meetings are effective or ineffective? And they said 70% of their meetings are useless time because
Wow.
we're just doing meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and people we're not trained how to do meetings in schools. We're not taught how to do it.
Yeah.
The Roberts rules sort of exist kind of out there as sort of this little foundation that we do to make things formal. But I just think people just don't have training, and some companies are now saying things like, if our meeting used to be an hour, it's now 45 minutes so that they can get to
Mhm.
the point and then leave 15 minutes for conversation and creativity.
Right.
Some people are like, we're doing a 30-minute meeting. It's a stand-up meeting. Nobody sits. We do the points, and then we have time to have our
Mm.
creative and our other thoughts. So I think it's
Mhm.
meetings as a whole, not
Yeah.
just joint committee meetings.
So interesting. So
Yeah, it's
interesting.
interesting,
Wow, we
right?
could. Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. It's so interesting. Um, as a safety professional, what is the key to being successful? If you were to give a piece of information to a brand new safety professional, what would be the one thing that you would encourage them in?
Well, I've already kind of mentioned safety is about relationships, which
Hmm.
I think it is. But just to give you something different and creative, I think as a safety professional, it's important to stay in awe.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is I hear so many safety professionals and supervisors say, "Oh, I'm just a glorified babysitter."
Hmm.
That drives me bananas. I mean, I get it. I know what you're saying, but it just kind of
Right.
gets a little bit at my heart because these are people and we're not babysitters. At one time we had to teach you how to do stuff and babysit
Right.
you. And I just think that's a horrible statement. And so for me,
Hmm.
well, when I had that company that we did years ago, when we were talking about it,
Hmm.
one of the things that I had to do was I decided that I was going to stay in awe of every employee, certainly that was in the office, because we would frustrate each other and we would get each other's nerves,
Sure.
and so as a leader and as a safety professional, I would walk around site, or in my case, the staff, and I would once a month find something that I was in awe of them
Hmm.
about, and instead of me going, "Oh, I've told you 22 times," like, I'm awe of you because of and I'm not talking about, "Oh, you're great. I love you. You're great." I'm not talking about that. I'm like, I
Right.
really appreciate you that you take the initiative more than other people, and that you do
Hmm.
this. Or I really appreciate you when you do this one tiny job or task. Like, I can't do it. I don't have time to do it. And I want you to know that is so valuable to me. And so
Yeah.
I think as safety professionals, if we can stay in awe of people instead of, oh, these people. Yeah, they're going to drive you nuts. They're people. We all
Yeah.
drive each other nuts. But
Yeah.
I think we need to stay in awe, at least find something to really be appreciative about.
I love that. That's so good. I'm making mental note of that. Um,
Get away. How about you, Simon? Like, this is your first podcast. You've been doing this a long
yeah.
time. What do you think is that one thing that really brought to you? Because you're very successful at what you do. So, what is that one
Hmm.
thing for you?
I think, yeah, I think starting small.
Mm,
Um, you know,
it's good.
people say safety is common sense, and it is. A lot of what we talk about day in, day out is stuff that, well, my grandpa, he always, like that was common sense. That wasn't something that you had to teach him. That was just understood,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, similar, being a curious learner, but being willing to look at the small things, and I'm not afraid to tell somebody a small thing because who knows whether they know it.
Hmm.
And I think something that is so refreshing is that the diversity that we have in people's different backgrounds, their upbringings, even cultures and communities that they were raised in,
Yeah.
is different than other people. And so you don't know what they know, right?
Right.
And I think that, with the amazing opportunity of having such diversity in our workplaces, it's it's sometimes like, well, why wouldn't you know that? Yeah, but
Hmm.
why would they? Like,
Why would they?
for
That's right.
them that wasn't normal. And so I'm always willing to have the conversation about something small, um,
Nice.
because that way you can build off of it. and you don't know what people don't know until you talk to them about it.
It's true. And ask
So,
questions, right?
mhm,
So tell me
asking
yeah,
questions.
what do you know? What's your experience in this? And then you know where they're at. So you're not,
Yeah,
talking down. They're like, I know that already. Like, just tell me what you know, what you don't
right.
know, and then just tell those small things. And I think that
Yeah.
that's amazing, Simon. That's incredible. And
Hmm.
using that as an example, I was talking to a supervisor. It was an older supervisor, of course, and he
Hmm.
was frustrated. Same thing, like these kids, they don't know, like, it's just common sense. And I said, you just need to remember, like, and I mean, I am 53, so I am, I guess, maybe older to some degree. I like not to think so, but here I am. Um, in my lifetime, before I was 15, 16, 17, I had learned
Right.
to change the oil in my car. Like my dad or my mom, it
Right.
wasn't my dad, it was my mom. My dad was useless in those kinds of things. My mom worked in a gas station actually, and so
Okay.
she was really good at that. So she's the one that sort of taught me this stuff. And my dad was the
Wow.
one, like, we built a shed. He taught me how to use the tools and do stuff. I did all of that. Well,
Right.
now us who had kids, we like hire people to do that. So we think that these
Right.
kids are 16, 17. Like, of course they have to know how a hammer works or a skill saw works. No,
Sure.
not necessarily, because
No.
they weren't in the place that we were in where we were doing all of that by the time we were
Hmm.
17. They're not doing that now.
Yeah.
Right. And so I
Yeah.
think I love that you said that, talked to them about the small things. Who knew? Who knows?
Hmm. Well, and I think, tying that in, when we talk about the small things and ask questions, we're getting a sense for who they are
Mm.
because different generations deal with things differently. They communicate about things
Yeah,
differently.
sure.
And I remember having a conversation at one organization I was with, and there was a lady who, um, a bit more experienced than the people that she was working around. She kind of was the clerical person entering all this stuff, and she happened to work in an area where all the young 17-year-old, 18-year-old guys would crank up this loud music. And, like this was their workout. This was their social life.
Yeah.
This was, their job was life. Like this was just them. And she was frustrated one day and she said, Simon, I met her in the lunchroom. She's like, Simon, she's like, I just can't handle those young guys anymore. Like, I yell at them and I try and talk to them and they just don't listen. And I was like, okay, all right. And I'd just been to a safety conference, so I thought I knew all that in a bag of chips. And so I said,
That's true.
I was listening to this session, and they were talking about different generations and how they respond to things differently, and all joking aside, it is a very real thing
Hmm.
that we respond to things differently. And I talked to her about that. She's like, I'd never really thought about that before. So I said, well, if you ask questions, if you come alongside and build relationship and rapport with them,
Hmm.
and then say, hey, you know what? That music is really loud. Can we turn it down? You'll get a lot further with them and explain the reason why. Give them the why.
Yeah.
And so interesting. I actually met up with her. I ran into her at the grocery store a couple months ago, and this was like 8 years
Oh,
ago,
so fun.
and that this initial event happened. And I ran into her a couple months ago and I said, do you remember our conversation about this? She's like, yeah. She says, 100% I do. And it changed how I was able to communicate with those young guys. She's
Nice.
still at the same job, still in the same area, dealing with the same frustrations, but she found a way to communicate with it. And I think that, talking about those small things and identifying them and finding a way to get people on side with you,
Mhm.
um, it's life giving.
It
It's
is.
life giving.
And
Yeah,
life giving, life changing. Like, you want to save a life?
absolutely.
That's how you save a life.
Come on now. Yeah.
Preach it. Preach it, Simon. Love it.
Oh my goodness. This has been amazing, Tanya. Thank you so much for joining me, being my first guest. What an amazing conversation that we just had,
So fun.
and so many key takeaways on safety committees, on the practical experience that we have and learning how to adapt to that as a safety professional. Learning, talking about mental health and about risk assessments and bringing that excitement to the beginning and end of your safety committee meetings, and finally being positive. We've covered so much today.
Cram it all in.
Thank you so much. I
Thanks.
know, I think I got it all. But Tanya, where can people find more information about you or the services that you provide?
Oh, yeah. Great question. Thank you. You can go to my website, which is tanyasteel.ca. I'm there. I have my Joint Health and Safety Committee website, which is JOHSC, so Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee, so JOHSC.ca is there. And of course, you can certainly email me. We'll just put it wherever
We'll put
we
it in the show
can put it
notes.
in the
Yeah,
thing. People can absolutely email me at training@tanyasteel.ca. So I would love to help and be here. And if you're in construction, I do offer some free consulting for people who are in construction if you're in the province of British Columbia. And so, yeah, please, even if you're not, just call me anyways. I'm here to help, right? It's all about, for me, it's all about raising our next generation. And, I heard this probably from Wes, but it was that long ago I heard it, and it might have been from him. We're not here to watch the next generation kind of struggle and go through it, but to stand on our shoulders. So what we
absolutely.
already have learned, and then propel them farther than we have made it. And so that's what I want to do. So
Absolutely.
please, yeah, reach out, call me, talk to me. I'd
Yeah.
be happy, happy, happy to.
Amazing. Amazing. Tanya, thank you again so much. I appreciate it. And
Thank you,
for
Simon. Thanks for having
all of
me.
my podcast
Yeah.
people, thank you so much. And we will talk to you next
Yeah.
time. Hey, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Safety Simon Says. This was a tremendous interview, and I absolutely loved having Tanya on the show. You can find out more about her in the show notes. I know you have some takeaways from today's episode, just like I did. Click that subscribe button and share this podcast with someone you know. I'll see you next time on Safety Simon Says.